Welcome to richplanet.net, the programme which aims to uncover the truth behind the alien and UFO mystery. I'm Richard D. Hall, and this week's programme is about UFO disclosure. Increasingly, more and more people believe that our governments are holding secrets about aliens and UFOs. Disclosure would be the revealing of some or all of these secrets to the general public. In this programme, I will examine the likelihood of such an event and whether there is indeed already moves in this direction. The MOD released some of its files on UFO sightings in May and October 2008 and will be releasing more files this year. Could the release of these files be part of an overall policy to eventually disclose the whole truth? UFO researcher Tim Good explains that none of these files are in fact top secret. The top secret files on UFOs remain hidden.
I find it extraordinary that in the media, all these sort of headlines, top secret files finally revealed. Well, in the last few years, no top secret files have been released, and very, very few secret files. Certainly, Project Condign was an example about 4 years ago of a UK eyes only secret document classified like that, mostly 465 odd pages. But generally, I would say 95% are just confidential. That is the classification, which is very lowly. Yeah. And I was amused to see in the papers my own reports sent to the Ministry of Defence, like the famous case of Alfred Berthoud, the fisherman who encountered a landed UFO in Aldershot, which a case I investigated thoroughly, and I first published it in Above Top Secret. Right. Prior to that, I sent the report to my full investigation to the Ministry of Defence, and of course this is trumpeted by the media as top secret files from the Ministry of Defence. Here's their report on the Alfred Berthoud case. I mean...
And it's been in your book for years and years.
Yes.
In May 2001, an American organisation called the Disclosure Project held a historic press conference to try and get the US government to reveal its secrets. A similar event was held in November 2007, where military, intelligence, civilian and government personnel revealed their knowledge of UFOs. Neither of these events succeeded in bringing about disclosure, although the organisers of these groups are still actively campaigning. Gary Heseltine is a detective constable and investigates police UFO sightings in the UK. I asked him for his thoughts on the disclosure movement. And do you think we're going to get a disclosure? Is that something that you would welcome, a disclosure?
Yeah. I mean, I'm fascinated by the Disclosure Project, and tentatively, and if I had some sort of financial backing, would seek to organise a British disclosure on British witnesses, because I think there's plenty out there, pilots, radar operators, senior military figures who'll come forward. I've spoken to them and spoke to many of them and said, look, if ever this happens, would you be prepared to speak? Holt will be prepared to do a British disclosure. I know he's done the American disclosure, but because this is a British case, he would be willing to be a part of the British disclosure if that ever gets off the ground, but it's the funding and the time, and that's the problem.
UFO researcher Tim Good has some reservations about a full disclosure.
Based on what I've learnt, full disclosure would be disastrous on several fronts, and I have been convinced, certainly for the last 7 years, that gradual disclosure, which I believe is the official agenda, if you can call it that, because relatively few people in governments have the faintest idea what's happening, as you know. Really, it's got to be gradual. That is what I have been led to believe. And based on what I know, I don't know everything, I think that is the wisest way forward.
Okay. And do you think that the releasing of the MOD files in March 2008 and October 2000, do you think that's the start of that type of process, or is that just a coincidence?
I think in a way it could be. I really do feel, because at the very least it's generating a tremendous amount of media interest. Each time these documents are released by the batch. As you know, since the Freedom of Information Act in 2004, the MOD has been accelerating the normal process, which used to be every 30 years, every 50 years, 75 years, 100 years, never, whatever, of officially releasing files. But they've been accelerating the process.
I think that we are moving closer to a major decision in the sense of mainstream science.
Right.
15 years ago, mainstream science and astronomy would say there is probably life out there. No, possibly life out there in the cosmos. 10 years ago, they would probably then say probably. Now, mainstream science, not ufologists, are broadly saying that wherever there is water found, there will be some kind of life, however minuscule, microscopic.
You said that you didn't think full disclosure would be wise because it would
No.
it would be problematic. But can you elaborate on that? I mean, what is it? What secrets are they holding that the masses would not be able to cope with? Yeah.
Well, I'll give you a few examples.
Okay.
First of all, we're not just, when you talk about aliens coming here, we're not talking about one group. I know from my own connections that it's accepted by some governments that up to 50 or more species have been coming here over the years, and that's not so outrageous. Essentially, they're all humanoid, but there are variations. Let's just take a look at the abduction phenomenon, for starters. What is the true purpose of the abduction scenario? The aliens who are, and there are several types of aliens involved in abductions, not just the little greys as they're referred to as. There are other types, more human types have been involved in abducting. The famous Herbert Schirmer case, for example, in Nebraska, very human type beings, very similar to Homo sapiens, certain differences, but then there are racial differences here, were involved. And I think, from what I've been told, certainly the so-called grey types, the ones with the sort of almond-shaped eyes and everything, their motives are not what they indicate and what they tell people.
Alien abduction is a well-known phenomenon, which is covered in a later program in this series. It's believed that for many years, aliens have been taking humans on board their craft, performing some kind of surgery, then creating a block in the abductee's brain so they cannot recall the event before returning them to the Earth. What is the purpose of these abductions?
There is a hybridization program. Hybridization is the name of the game. They've been doing that since the 1950s, as far as it seems. And I think it's diminished to an extent nowadays. That's the reports I get from around the world. But I think probably a conservative estimate would be that hundreds of thousands of people have actually been abducted. That's my opinion. Now the question is why? Well, what I have learnt regarding that scenario is that the purpose is indeed for hybridization, but it's not for our benefit. It can be argued that it's for our benefit, but what I'm told is that it's for their own agenda, which is takeover of this planet. Now that's kind of disturbing, if it's true. I don't know it's true, I'm just saying what I have learnt. And this is obviously very, very disturbing. And apparently the hybridization program, half alien, half human, whatever the proportions are, is to make us acquiescent, less violent. I think I can see very good reasons for that. But at the same time, is it going to make us more acquiescent to what they want to do, which is to take over this planet? They need this planet. I'm sure there are several spacefaring races who need this planet. Earth is unique. Astrophysicists are absolutely right about this. Earth is unique, not obviously in the Milky Way, but for quite a ways around. And I think for donkey's years, it's a very attractive prospect to people looking for alternative planets to have bases on them or whatever.
No matter how awful the facts are about the alien agenda, my own belief is that we all have the right to know about it. But there is still a huge gulf between what ufologists believe to be true and what mainstream scientists will tell you. So how do we reconcile the two?
At the point where mainstream science, and I think within the next 5 years we'll get this, that mainstream science will say there is microscopic life on Mars, under the Arctic. We found it, we found probe, you know. It nearly happened 10 years ago when the rock and the, right? But when that definitive mainstream science, it's on the news, saying, yeah, we found microscopic life on Mars, that will, to me, mark a sea change that has to change in the idea of the developed world, because they have to then accept that if there is microscopic life on Mars, that the idea of extraterrestrial life is no longer a figment of imagination. Mainstream science is saying that wherever there is water as a constituent on any planet, and if you look over the, I think over the last 3 or 4 years, they've discovered something like over 200 Earth-like type planets, way off in the universe. Then, if there is water on those planets, there's going to be life of some kind. And to my mind, as soon as they accept that there's life, however microscopic, it's still life. Then you have to accept that life has maybe developed quicker on other planets, that it's far more abundant than what people have realised, and that if it's abundant, some of it may have developed at a quicker rate than Earth has developed, and therefore that it would have developed the technology that would be so much advanced, and therefore the distances would erode, and therefore the idea of travel.
Some people believe that Barack Obama will become known as the Disclosure President. Obama recently appointed Leon Panetta as the head of the CIA. Panetta is known to be close to John Podesta, who was President Clinton's chief of staff. Podesta is strongly in favor of UFO disclosure. There could well be strong opposition should Obama decide to adopt a policy of disclosure. Do you think an American president, if he found out what was going on, let's say Barack Obama gained some of this knowledge, do you think he would have the power to go for full disclosure?
Let me give you an example. I learnt, for example, that President Kennedy in 1961, 1962 requested observation of the alien bodies recovered in some of these events, crash retrieval cases. His request was granted, and as I've written in Need to Know, he was taken on Air Force One to Tyndall Air Force Base in Florida, and he viewed the bodies. I don't know much more than that, except it was a top secret mission, and it was headed by General Godfrey T. McHugh. And interestingly, from another source, I learnt that General McHugh replaced one of the principal military attendees at Dallas on 22nd of November 1963 at the last minute. So you could put two and two together and make 22, but I don't know. I think Kennedy was assassinated.
Linked
to the fact that he probably wanted to tell the public. You may recall that 3 tramps were arrested near the grassy knoll, suspected of maybe having something to do with the assassination. I think they were eventually released without charge, but one of those so-called tramps was none other than Fred Chrisman, who was a counterintelligence agent for the CIA and with the United States Air Force, who had specialized in the UFO problem.
Right. Okay. So we have a possible link there then.
Definitely.
Okay. If the president is unable to get to the truth, what about our scientists? And do you say that scientists are gradually accepting, a little bit at a time?
Yeah, there's definitely been a shift over the last 15 years.
Do you think that they know what the end game is, the total disclosure of intelligent species, or do you think that movement towards is just by chance, that they are discovering water and then they're going to discover microbes, or do you think it's an orchestrated sort of
Led. I think there's probably two ways. I think there is a definite power on the media as a whole to downplay this subject. Mainstream science does not look at this subject officially because of the way it's portrayed in the media, and they're led to believe there's nothing to it. Some scientists who do get involved immediately can realise that there is something to it. But they're, you know, you go back to the likes of John Mack, Professor John Mack at Harvard. He came into the subject as a total sceptic, studied the abduction scenario for a year, and concluded at the end of it these were people reliving real experiences, and that it wasn't made up, and it wasn't, you know, people with vivid imaginations. So when that happens, but they tend to be ostracised, as he was ostracised, and they tried to get him out of Harvard and whatever, and he becomes a rebel because he doesn't follow the party line. And I think mainstream science is very rigid.
Yeah.
It's quite narrow.
Yeah.
You will only get your paper published if you accept our rules and it falls within that narrow band of field.
Yeah.
And if it's not, you're then for not mainstream, you fall outside of us, you'll never get it published, you'll never get your work. I think it's very rigid system science. Yeah. And I think, for me, I'm not a scientist, don't want to be, and I think I just look at it from a common sense point of view. And if you do, and you look at the evidence of credible people, there is an overwhelming picture that paints the picture that there is a small percentage of UFO sightings that are real, of an extraterrestrial origin. I'm absolutely convinced of that. And as I say, the next big thing will be the day when it's definitively, yes, there's life on Mars, microscopic or otherwise, then that will have to mark a sea change, because as soon as they accept, science accepts, that there is life on another planet, they have to then accept that it may exist elsewhere and may have developed earlier and can be coming for many, many thousands of years.
Do you think we will get disclosure?
I think to an extent disclosure has begun.
Right.
No longer can governments ridicule this subject, and I'm quite sure they're concerned, since there's been several low-level overflights, like in Phoenix, for example, in 1997, and the Stephenville thing of early 2008, I think the fact that, you know, at first they denied it, and it was such a ridiculous, ludicrous explanation that they gave, and they've had to realise there's no way they can sit on this all the time. You can fool some of the people all the time.
Do you think that we will have full disclosure in our lifetimes?
Well, yes, I think it's moving towards that within the next 20 years. They say that when the large array of radio telescopes, there's a place, I forget what it's called, but there's a huge number of, it's about a mile wide of all these, there's going to be hundreds, and they say that once that comes online, which is about 2020, they say that within a year they should be able to detect if there is any intelligent signals within, I think, 100 light years of Earth. And so I think at that point there probably will be within that 100 light years some kind of intelligent life form. And I think that's again when mainstream science will say, yes, yes, we've definitely got an intelligent signal. Right. And so 2020 could be.
Yeah.
I'll give you the reasons why I think a disclosure process has begun. It may not be, you know, what you want, but the fact of the matter is that governments of several countries, France, United Kingdom, Brazil, I think Spain has certainly released a lot of top secret files over the years, and there's a number of other governments too. And this process, as I said earlier, has been accelerated. I was interviewed on ABC News, on a primetime news program, and they actually quoted me saying some things which quite a few years ago I'm quite sure they would have cut, or they would have made me look foolish. And they're also planning, they're planning a documentary, more documentaries, and I hope to be involved in those. Nick Pope's been involved as well. Also, talking of Nick Pope, in last year's New York Times, he published a long article saying that it's all real. They're here. Some UFOs are ETs. That would not have appeared in the New York Times even 2 years ago because it's the establishment, one of the main establishment papers in the United States, and they've just never published anything other than ridiculous articles on the subject. They used to publish very serious articles on the subject right up to the 1960s, but so something tells me, and I get the impression from ABC that they're starting to take it all seriously now, and so I think things are moving. They can't sit on this forever.
I asked David Boyle, who was an expert on conspiracies, the same question. So do you think there's going to be disclosure?
Yes, there is. Just look at the televisions and newspapers. Look at the Sun newspaper, which is one of the biggest comics you've ever got. Well, but I mean, it does tell you. Read as well. Well, one of the reasons is if people read it the most, then it's the best place to put information in. Yeah. Every single day in the last 2 weeks, practically, there's been either UFOs, other dimensions, other ghosts, variations, and you've got to realise that the UFO phenomena is attached to everything else. People say it's separate. It's separate from the understanding of the control of the planet. No, it's not.
In November 2007 at the National Press Club, when government people and pilots, and I think Edgar Mitchell, astronaut, this was James
Fox organised.
Yes, with Leslie Kane. That was terrific, and that really made people sit up. And I know that because the Washington Times wrote a very, very straight article about it, and I subsequently contacted a journalist, and nobody tried to stop that article.
Do you think there is a disclosure going to come from a government, and they're going to admit to knowing about ETs?
Yes,
do you see that,
it's coming. Look at the papers today. The papers again are the media. Media is controlled by the same people. All the televisions, radios and newspapers, practically in the entire democratic world, are all controlled by just a couple of groups of organisations. And when you know that, they're only allowed to do it. I mean, we had a recent incident here in Blackpool when a gentleman died on a stage, having said 2 minutes earlier that he was going to tell us who the Antichrist was, who killed Bobby Kennedy, and was explaining about 9/11. He drops dead as soon as he starts to talk about it on the stage in front of 400 people. Was there a word about it in any newspapers? No. I rang the local newspaper and asked them what they were doing about it, and they said they couldn't do anything about it. But of course the front page that day was full about dog shit on the promenade at Blackpool. So I mean, which is more intelligent, a guy who's going out to do this, who drops dead? And of course a lot of people there no longer believe that he died of natural causes, because he was about to release a lot of information that would have been detrimental to the people that have the vested interests.
One thing that Gary said while I was interviewing, I asked him about the Disclosure Project, and he said that if he had enough money, he would like to get involved with the British Disclosure, perhaps not Disclosure Project, but Disclosure event, shall we say.
Yes.
Is that something that you would be interested in?
Sure, yeah.
Okay. There has certainly been an increase in newspaper coverage of the UFO subject. But as I mentioned earlier, previous attempts to force governments to tell the truth have been very compelling, but have so far failed. Perhaps a British attempt on disclosure is what is needed.